Tonight at 10, tragedy in the English Channel. At least 31 migrants have drowned trying to reach the UK. It's the worst incident of its kind since the migrant crisis started in the Channel. A rescue operation is still going on. The French authorities say those who died are victims of criminal smugglers. Britain says it's a terrible tragedy and a warning to others.
It's an appalling thing that they have suffered. But I also want to say that this disaster underscores how dangerous it is to cross the Channel in this way.
I'm live in Calais, where the French President Emmanuel Macron has said he won't let the Channel become a cemetery.
We'll have the latest on the emergency operations going on. Also tonight, from the headquarters here of BBC Scotland in Glasgow, the First Minister tells the BBC she will serve a full term until 2026. She intends to press ahead with plans for an independence referendum. We have the story of a man with autism and learning disabilities who's been held in a secure unit for 21 years because of a lack of community support. A review of the way that English football is governed calls for an independent regulator to sort out the game's finances. And we survey the future of the Scottish Highlands, where the race is on to return vast areas to their natural state.
And coming up in the sport on the BBC News Channel, some of snooker's biggest names back Shaun Murphy over his claims that amateurs should not be allowed in professional tournaments.
Good evening. We start with the tragedy in the English Channel today, where at least 31 migrants have drowned while trying to cross to the UK from France. There are 5 women and 2 children among the dead, according to the French authorities. At Westminster this evening, the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, held an emergency committee meeting to consider the government's response, while saying he was shocked, appalled and deeply saddened by the news. President Macron said that France would not allow the Channel to become a graveyard, and called for a joint European approach to the crisis. An air and sea rescue operation has been underway for several hours. Well, first, let's join our correspondent Lucy Williamson in Calais for the latest.
Well, as you say, the rescue and recovery operation has been going on here into the night, but there are very few details so far about who the victims are or why their boat sank. And there are questions already being raised in the local media here about whether it was simply bad weather, high waves, or whether it might have been hit by something like a container ship. No confirmed details as yet, but this town, this country is today simply coming to terms with what the government is calling a day of national tragedy. This is a tragedy that began with hope.
Where are you going now? Go UK. Go UK.
The water, nothing to be afraid of yet. Several boats set off from this coast at first light this morning. This one reached British shores without disaster. But a flimsy boat, dozens of desperate people. The warning signs have always been there. And today, one of these boats never arrived.
As far as we know, 33 people capsized off Dunkirk and Calais. As of now, 31 people died or were not resuscitated, and there are 2 survivors who are currently being treated and whose lives are also unfortunately in danger.
A local fisherman spotted the passengers floating motionless in the water. Helicopters and boats were scrambled to the scene for a rescue operation, but many had already drowned.
This disaster underscores how dangerous it is to cross the Channel in this way. And it also shows how vital it is that we now step up our efforts to break the business model of the gangsters who are sending people to sea in this way.
This was the fear that hung over all the politics, all the debates. Inside this hospital tonight, more than 30 people have been declared dead. 2 others are fighting for their lives. The crossing season this year has stretched well into the winter weather. It's a lucrative business for the people smugglers, but it's men, women and children who've paid the price. But people here in this Calais migrant camp are so determined to reach the UK that no one we met tonight said they'd change their plans. Ode tried crossing yesterday, but gave up because the waves were too high. France's coastline has never been as simple to secure as the Eurotunnel or the Calais port. Smugglers have made the most of that.
These people are moderns, and the poor migrants who have been coming from their country, who have spent months and months to come to here, and who are dying there so close to their dream.
Many more migrants arrived in the UK today. Good publicity for the people smuggling rings. But it often takes many attempts. And those who have capsized before have told me what it's like waiting in the water for help to arrive. One thought in their minds as the minutes tick by. What if it doesn't get here in time? Of 4 suspected people smugglers believed to have been linked to this crossing have now been arrested, French officials say. But for all the arrests here, all the deterrence over the months and years, there's no shortage of customers for this industry. And I've spoken to many people this year who've had to be rescued themselves from the waters of the Channel, and they keep on trying. And I think that says a great deal.
Lucy, many thanks for the latest there. Lucy Williamson, our correspondent, who's monitoring events in Calais. Well, only yesterday, the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, said that further talks were taking place between the UK and France to try to stop the crossings. So far this year, an estimated 25,600 migrants have crossed the Channel to the UK, and that is more than 3 times last year's figure. Our Home editor, Mark Easton, has the latest.
The lucky ones made it. Dozens of migrants, men, women and children reached the coast of Kent today, oblivious to the tragedy in their wake. This year has seen record numbers crossing the Channel in small boats, more than 25,000, 3 times the number in 2020. There aren't more asylum seekers asking for sanctuary in Britain. It's just that increased security and COVID have combined to make traditional routes by road, rail and air much less viable. So the smugglers and the migrants have switched to the most precarious route of all, in tiny craft through one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. The United Nations International Organization for Migration has been trying to keep track of the deaths in the Channel, counting between 8 and 30 people drowned each year since 2014. Before today, the figure for 2021 was at 15. Now it looks certain to be the worst year on record. So how should the politicians respond? There are 2 distinct strategies: to make it easier for the migrants or to make it harder. The government believes the answer is to get tough, describing all those who come to the UK through unofficial routes as illegal migrants, limiting their rights and making deportation easier and quicker. One plan had been to use border force vessels physically to push migrant dinghies back into French waters. But this tragedy will reignite concerns for the safety of those on board small boats.
Now I do think the time has come to make sure that there are people on the beaches from the UK, from France and from other European countries to make sure that there are patrols sufficient to stop the boats leaving, to make sure they are turned around while they are still close to French waters.
Charities and campaigners argue that the only long-term solution is to provide official safe routes to the UK for all those fleeing war and persecution. While the Home Office proposes more pathways from refugee camps, the Red Cross is among those who believe the UK should open its borders and its hearts.
We need to do 2 things. We need to create safe and legal routes for people to get here through planned resettlement programmes and family reunion. And we also need to have a safe and fair asylum system here so that people, when they've made their journeys, can claim asylum and be fairly assessed.
We need to be disrupting the business models of these vile people smugglers away from the coast, and we need as well to be looking at properly managed safe and legal routes.
Politics often gets in the way when searching for long-term cooperative answers to these international challenges. But amid the grief, there is a hope that today's tragedy may prove to be a catalyst in finding commitment and agreement across borders. Mark Easton, BBC News.
Now, here in Scotland, the First Minister has told the BBC today that she has no intention of standing down and she signalled her intention to remain in post until at least the end of the Parliament in 2026. Nicola Sturgeon said that she intended to present legislation to the Scottish Parliament which would allow for an independence referendum before the end of 2023, a national vote that could need the agreement of Westminster. First Minister was speaking to our political editor, Laura Kuensberg.
The view from the top, from the desk of a politician who wants to stay there. Nicola Sturgeon was already in charge before Brexit, before Boris Johnson in number 10, and certainly before a world emergency she's still grappling with now.
We are in a position in Scotland right now, and I say this with some trepidation because we know how unpredictable this virus still is. Cases have stabilised, they are actually slightly declining. The position though remains very precarious.
I know a lot of Scots are wondering why people can go to nightclubs but they can't go and see their kids in a nativity play.
There is no 100% perfect logic to this. Still, governments everywhere, and some governments across Europe right now are faced again with some of the most invidious decisions.
And those difficult decisions are still around, but the end of the pandemic is also important to you for political reasons. You would like to move to another referendum on independence after the pandemic. Now, what is after the pandemic? How do you define that?
As we come out of the acute phase of this pandemic, then recovery from the pandemic does bring very much to the fore and into focus what kind of powers a government has, what ability people in Scotland have to choose the direction of the country.
For many of your supporters who see independence as an urgent question, as something they really, really want to happen as soon as it's possible.
I want it to happen as soon as it's possible.
Well, but you can't tell them when. And just be straight about that. You can't tell them when.
Laura, there's a reason I can't tell them. My duty, the duty of any leader in any country right now, is to navigate our way through this pandemic. Have you got some paper?
Yet the exact timetable of another vote's hazy. Despite her undoubted dominance, polls suggest enthusiasm for independence is waning.
Right.
And doubts about her own future have crept into the political conversation.
When it comes to the question of independence, isn't the truth of it, you're a bit stuck? I mean, the country is pretty stubbornly divided, pretty much 50-50 on this. Polling suggests the enthusiasm for independence has actually faded.
No, it doesn't.
But it has fallen back. The average over the last 6 months is the 3% gap. It's always roughly 50-50.
Occasionally, the polls are slightly above 50%. Occasionally now they're slightly below 50%. But
do you ever worry that you've missed the moment?
No. No.
A lot of people are wondering if your mind has been turning to your own future. Will you guarantee you'll lead your party at the next Holyrood election?
I will fulfil the mandate I've been given to to govern as First Minister for this term of the Scottish Parliament. I'll set out my intentions. Look,
And beyond that?
I almost take the wishful thinking of my opponents on this as some kind of, I'm sure, unintended compliment, but compliment nevertheless. It's almost as if my opponents have concluded they can't beat me or remove me from office themselves, so they're kind of crossing their fingers and hoping that I'll remove myself from office. But they're going to be really disappointed because I'm going to be round a lot longer.
In an interview that you gave, you talked about writing your memoirs.
I'm not a robot. People ask me questions. What are you going to do after politics? I'm 51 years old. You know, I have no intentions of going anywhere right now as First Minister, but I hope I will still be relatively young when I get to the point of contemplating other things.
After 2026, that's a different question. But Nicola Sturgeon is far from ready to abandon the desk, at least not yet. Laura Kuensberg, BBC News, Edinburgh.
Watching that with me is our Scotland editor, Sarah Smith. There were lots of interesting exchanges there, Sarah. We talk about the road to a referendum. What does that road look like?
Well, Nicola Sturgeon says she's absolutely determined it will happen before the end of 2023. To make that happen, she has to introduce legislation into the Scottish Parliament, but that would almost certainly be challenged by the UK government, who will say that the Scottish Parliament just doesn't have the power to authorise a referendum. So that will become a legal battle that will end up in the Supreme Court. They'll have to decide that one. There's also a significant political issue for Nicola Sturgeon, which is it's far from guaranteed that the SNP would win an independence referendum if they have one in the next couple of years. She knows she needs to make a brand new case for independence. Since the last vote, we've had Brexit, the pandemic. The economic argument has completely changed. Back in 2014, we had buoyant receipts from North Sea oil. Now it's clear an independent Scotland can't base its economy on fossil fuels. So there's a lot of work to do inside the Scottish Government, the wider independence movement, to come up with a really detailed proposition that could convince voters they'd be better off leaving the United Kingdom.
OK, Sarah, once again, many thanks. Sarah Smith, our Scotland editor there. A man with autism and learning disabilities has been held in a secure unit for 21 years because of a lack of support in the community. A senior judge has criticised the authorities for outrageous delays in handling the case. And BBC News has now succeeded in getting a court order lifted, allowing us to name Tony Hickmott, who is 44. His case is by no means an exception. The latest figures show that there are more than 2,000 patients with learning disabilities or autism in similar situations across England. And BBC News has learned that at least 100 of them have been held in secure settings for more than 20 years. Our correspondent Jane McCubbin has been to meet Tony Hickmott's parents, who've taken their fight to the Court of Protection to try to get their son back.
9 months. Be away for 9 months until they found him a suitable place in Brighton area. That's what we was told. But it's far from the truth.
He's lived there longer now than he's lived at home. You can't take that trauma away.
On June 29, 2001, Pam and Roy's son Tony was detained under the Mental Health Act. Like many young people with autism and a learning disability, he'd struggled to cope as he became an adult.
I love this.
I love you too, Tony.
He's now lived in an ATU, an assessment and treatment unit, for almost 21 years, 100 miles from his family. The BBC has had to go to court to tell you Tony's story. His family have had to go to court to try and bring him back to Brighton.
1 week runs into a month, month runs into a year.
Then that year went, then another year went.
I mean, we travel back sometimes, we pull in and we both sit down and cry. I mean, I come home, I've got Pam, she's got me, he's got nobody.
ATUs are designed for short-term stays in a crisis. The problem here isn't Tony, but the system. Psychiatrists have said he's been fit for discharge since 2013.
This month, the family went to the Court of Protection to try and break the deadlock. There, a judge said that delays facing Tony have been egregious, that the progress made to date has been glacial.
The judge has told them to get on with it, right? We've only got this limited time. We're still not doing it. We're still fighting over money.
The senior judge took the unusual step of lifting the anonymity order because she said she had no doubt Tony's case was in the public interest, and it was clear that a lack of resources had left him detained for so long. Tony's care right now is funded by the NHS, but ongoing support in the community will have to be paid for by his council, who told us Tony has extremely complex needs. We tried on a number of occasions to find a sustainable solution nearer to Brighton. Those were not successful. They're working with the NHS and Tony's family to find other options. It's a decade since BBC cameras captured the neglect and abuse of people with learning disabilities in Winterbourne View. That prompted the government to set targets to move people into real homes with appropriate support. But those targets have been missed repeatedly.
Ultimately, these settings should not exist. It's just appalling. These people are not criminals. They haven't got sentences through the criminal justice process. They are stuck in services, just as people used to be stuck in the long-stay institutions.
NHS England told us they are continuing to work to find the highly specialised support required. The judge has ordered authorities finally find a plan to bring him back to Brighton by May next year. Tony's wait continues.
When we visited town, we're leaving, and he pushes his face right to the window and watches us till we disappear.
I can't look back. What have they done to all of us as a family?
They destroyed us.
Oh, dear.
Jane McCubbin, BBC News.
A review of the way football is governed in England has concluded that an independent regulator is needed to put the sport on a sounder financial footing and to give fans more say in the way that their teams are run. The review, led by the former Sports Minister Tracy Crouch, was set up by the review after the 6 big Premier League clubs tried to form a breakaway European Super League, while at the same time many clubs in the lower divisions were experiencing severe financial problems. Our sports editor Dan Rowan has the story.
It's the most popular sport in the country, but with clubs going bust and after the threat of a breakaway, scrutiny on football has intensified. And tonight, the woman tasked with a landmark review of the English game told me it was time for radical reform.
We've seen football lurch from crisis to crisis over the last decade or so, and unfortunately we haven't necessarily had the right levels of regulation in place to stop
that crisis from happening. I think we've reached a point where people are saying no more.
Crucially, Crouch wants a powerful independent football regulator that would have stopped the attempt by the Premier League's Big Six earlier this year to join a European Super League. Overseeing financial regulation, it could even block spending by owners deemed to be irresponsible.
Is there a danger, though, that it makes investing in clubs here a less attractive proposition?
I don't believe that anything that I do or I've recommended in this report will deter investors from operating in English football. If anything, I think that it will encourage investment because we'll have better regulation in place.
The regulator would enforce a beefed-up owners and directors test for new buyers. Other proposals include a transfer levy to get more money from the Premier League to the rest of the game, reform of parachute payments to relegated clubs, and fan empowerment through shadow boards and a so-called golden share. That would mean supporter consent needed over key decisions such as a change of club name or stadium relocation, unlike in the past when Wimbledon was infamously moved to Milton Keynes. This also comes too late for Bury, which 2 years ago ceased to exist after a financial collapse to the dismay of its fans.
It's a big part of their lives, and to have those habits and routines just broken almost overnight has had a really severe detrimental effect, not just on the economics of the area, but also on people's mental health.
And this season, a championship club that twice won the First Division title in the 70s also fell into administration.
Derby County, for many, is sadly emblematic of a broken and unsustainable club system, one that encourages too many to overspend in the pursuit of promotion, and which shows why radical change is now needed to the way that clubs are both financed and run.
Criticised for allowing the controversial recent Saudi takeover of Newcastle United, the Premier League said tonight that reforms mustn't damage the game. But with the government likely to support Crouch, football seems set for momentous change. Dan Rowan, BBC News.
Let's take a look now at the latest pandemic figures for the UK. And they show there were more than 43,500 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. That's 5,000 cases more than last Wednesday. On average, there were 43,296 new cases reported per day in the past week. 149 deaths were recorded of people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID test. And on average, therefore, in the past week, 132 COVID-related deaths were recorded every day. And on the vaccination front, more than 16 million people have now had their booster injection, which is more than 27% of the population aged over 12. A jury in the US state of Georgia has found 3 white men guilty of murdering a black man as he jogged in the city of Brunswick last year. The killing of Ahmaud Arbery, along with that of George Floyd in Minneapolis, helped inspire the Black Lives Matter movement. 3 men claimed they were defending themselves while trying to perform a citizen's arrest on Mr. Arbery, who they said looked like a burglar. Our correspondent Ali Makboul has the story.
0433.
There have been times when this moment seemed a very distant prospect.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Travis McMichael, guilty.
The shout of relief came from the father of Ahmaud Arbery, who was shot dead in February of last year. 2 others were also found guilty of murder.
3 felony murder.
They'd all seen 25-year-old Ahmaud running through their neighborhood and claimed he'd fitted the description of a crime suspect. They chased him and killed him. During the trial, the man who fired the fatal shots, Travis McMichael, was the only one of the 3 to take to the witness stand.
I shot. Why? He had my gun. He struck me. It was obvious that he was. It was obvious that he was attacking me. That if he would have got the shotgun from me, then it was this is a life or death situation.
His justification was that he killed in self-defense, but of course that was only after he, his father and a neighbor had chased Ahmaud Arbery in their pickup trucks for 5 minutes. Ahmaud's family waited more than 10 weeks and had to rely on public pressure for the police to even make any arrests.
I never thought this day would come, but God is good.
Yes, He is.
And I just want to tell everybody thank you for those who marched, those who prayed, most of all the ones who prayed.
Yes, Lord.
Thank you, guys.
Yes, Lord.
Thank you.
Well, there may still be questions about the way the police behaved after this killing, questions about the underlying issues surrounding race in the society that contributed to the killing. But for now, at least, all of those who for months have been calling for justice for Ahmaud Arbery, there is just a huge sense of relief. Aline McBall, BBC News in Brunswick, Georgia.
Let's have a look at some football in tonight's Champions League action. Manchester City qualified for the knockout stages with a 2-1 win over Paris Saint-Germain. And Liverpool, who were already through, beat Porto 2-0. My colleague Andy Swiss was watching the action.
Paris Saint-Germain, whose manager Maurizio Pochettino is one of the favourites for the vacant Manchester. Sterling transforming the Mancunian mood. Excited? Just a bit. A 2-1 win for City, sealing their qualification in exhilarating fashion. As for Liverpool, well, with top spot in their group already guaranteed, they eased to a 2-0 win against Porto. A stunner from Thiago and another from Mo Salah. All four English teams into the knockout stage then. Could it once again be their year? Andy Swiss, BBC News.
Now, tonight's BBC News at 10 is brought to you from Glasgow, from the headquarters of the BBC in Scotland. This is Pacific Quay, this rather impressive building. It opened in 2007, and this is home to BBC Scotland's television, radio and online services, covering all aspects of national life. And one of those crucial aspects is the future of the Scottish Highlands. Vast areas of the countryside are being bought by wealthy individuals keen to return the land to its natural state. They want to introduce the process of rewilding and to stop what they consider ecological degradation, deforestation and the loss of biodiversity. Our special correspondent Alan Little has been investigating.
There is a juniper bush appearing, and right down here we have a rowan. It's got its orange autumnal colours on it there.
Across hundreds of thousands of acres, some of Scotland's landowners are changing the way they use land. This is Glenfeshie, where most of the deer have been culled. Do that, and tree and other plant life comes back naturally. Habitats and ecosystems lost to grazing for centuries are reseeding. Insects, birds and mammals should follow.
None of this is planted, this is all natural regeneration. That's why we have a 200-year vision. To get this whole debate away from the here and the now, me and you, them and us, it's a 200-year vision. We're not going to be here. This is for future generations.
The aim is to undo the ecological degradation inflicted by previous generations. The Victorians romanticised this land as wild and unspoilt, but they turned much of Scotland into shooting estates. Deer for stalking laid waste to native plant and tree life.
My own grandfather was a gamekeeper on a lowland estate from the 1930s to the 1970s, and this is the game book from the estate. It's a meticulous record of every shoot that took place, and it begins in 1847, just at the period when the Victorians were turning so much of Scotland over to blood sport estates. This seems to me to be a historical artefact that bears witness to a period when human beings really thought they could bend nature to their own will to satisfy not just their need for food, but also their desire for recreation and entertainment.
In an age of climate crisis, can the grouse moor survive? Estate managers say their land is a carbon sink where the peatland, if managed properly, locks huge quantities of carbon in the ground.
This idea that nothing else happens apart from grouse shooting on grouse moors is just not true. You know, what you see is a balanced approach to managing the landscape so that you can give the best possible chance for a wild bird to thrive. And it's only the surplus which are shot. And country sports, yes, it's a pleasure in the same way that golf and hill walking and other things which happen in Scotland and are celebrated are. You know, people come from all over the world because Scotland has the best grouse shooting globally, and that's something that we should celebrate.
But the rewilders believe they are turning the page on the Victorian legacy and redefining Scottish land use for the climate age. There are several big renaturing projects over hundreds of thousands of acres, mostly driven by the private passions of billionaire landowners, sometimes called the Green Lairds.
We know these landscapes are socially unjust because of the concentration of land ownership, the land inequality. So I see a lot of the landlord-driven, the green layered-driven restoration and rewilding projects as only really dealing with a small part of the problem in these landscapes. I want to see environmental restoration that also deals with the social justice issues of these landscapes.
But for now, just as in the Victorian age, it is private landlords with the power of their private wealth who are reimagining the Scottish landscape in our day. Alan Little, BBC News in the Highlands.
The growing debate over the future of the magnificent Scottish Highlands. That was Alan Little reporting there. That's it from Glasgow for tonight. A quick reminder, Newsnight is about to start, probably has just started on BBC Two, with a special programme from Dover on the migrant crisis. And now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Have a good night.